Now, if you've seen some of the videos, I sometimes reference this person called Mike Kilmo, who has what's known as the ring theory with regard to the prequels. Though it applies to the OT as well, he's sort of more famous for the prequels. I'll just go through very quickly to the theory, its problems, and I'll give a refined version and how it applies to Palpatine, Mace, Anakin, and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith. And we'll see that it has a lot of things to suggest, but I think it needs to be really refined for the theory to make sense. So the theory in a nutshell is actually pretty simple. If you look at the prequels in OT, you might think that, for instance, Phantom Menace lines up with Star Wars 1977. But Mike's theory is this: the structure is not ABC, ABC with the trilogies, but ABC, CBA. So in other words, that Phantom Menace really hooks up with Return of the Jedi, Attack of the Clones hooks up with Empire Strikes Back. Obviously, they're middle chapters. But Revenge of the Sith is really more tied with Star Wars 1977, the first film. Now, this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense because in terms of the plot, they're very, very different. But as he shows, if you look very closely at scenes, images, the way shots are composed, even dialogue, they do in fact have this mirror structure. And the ring theory explains why, because Lucas wanted to find a way to sort of, have the films resonate in terms of the theme, and he chose this circular structure and imposed it on the prequels. And he also had some more, kind of added evidence, sort of like this 7-point list that what the prequels need to have for them to match this. And we can wave that off. I think he's correct that, they have they split up in half, they have resolutions, the Phantom Menace is a prologue, so on and so forth. So, yeah, the 7 points do seem to match up to his theory. But like a lot of people, I'm very skeptical that he's basically solved the problem because as many people have countered, okay, fine, even if you prove there is a circular or ring structure, that doesn't improve the prequels. It could still be they're just bad films. The fact that they mirror or parallel the OT doesn't really get us anywhere. It's like, okay, that's a clever little narrative technique, but how does it help us with the films? And I think what's going on is not a single ring theory, as Mike is sort of proposing, but a double ring theory with a Kubrick influence. So I think the real argument is really a DRK argument, and I'm going to try to prove it with using the Mace and Obi-Wan confrontation at the end with Anakin, and sort of how these two scenes are actually already foreshadowed in mirror earlier scenes. So let's go with the Mace one first. I think that's actually the more obvious one. When we see at the very beginning, we have Anakin and Obi-Wan try to infiltrate the ship to save Palpatine. They eventually confront Dooku, and Dooku knocks Obi-Wan, and Dooku then fights with Anakin, and eventually Anakin wins. He slices off his his hands, and he's prostrate before him, and he's about to execute him. And he hesitates, and at this point Palpatine says he needs to do it, and that he's too dangerous, you can't hold him for trial. And Anakin gives in to his anger, and he kills him by decapitating him. And this is going to come up later because the almost exact same dialogue is used in the scene with Mace. So when Mace goes to confront Palpatine, he says the same thing, that, when he reveals himself as Sidious and shows all his power, he says he's just too dangerous to be left alive. And again, the dialogue is almost exactly the same, where Anakin says it's not the Jedi way, we shouldn't do that. But again, earlier he gave into that and killed off Dooku. So he should be approving what Mace is doing with Sidious, because he violated the Jedi way, but he still killed him. But when Mace does it, of course, we know he intervenes and he cuts off Mace, and then Sidious uses that to blast Mace and basically turn Anakin to the dark side. So we see that there's a lot of foreshadowing, and there's a doubling of the scene. So in a certain way, that Mace and Anakin are doppelgangers, right? They're sort of clones of one another, not in a biological or even within the world. We mean in terms of the fiction, that these are basically mirror images of one another. And if you know a little bit more about the EU and the larger story, Mace actually thought he was the chosen one. So that's why he's always so angry or arrogant towards Anakin, because he thought, well, no, I've been the chosen one and you're not the chosen one. And so there's already this kind of weird jealousy, like brothers between them. But let me jump into the more, I think, interesting stuff, which is with Anakin and Obi-Wan, where I think, again, Mike is wrong, because if we look very closely, yes, the scenes do mirror one another, but they don't mirror what's going on with Star Wars, because, again, Leia is not pregnant. Leia just, Luke meets Leia, but she's not pregnant. They're not having children together. But what's moving the plot in Revenge of the Sith is that Anakin thinks Padme is going to die. But if you look closely, the first Force vision he has, Obi-Wan is standing over Padme. So in the first image, which is not true later, because we're going to see that Obi-Wan is in the hallway when Padme has all these, pain in her body. So this is what Anakin wants to believe, that somehow Obi-Wan and Padme have an affair together. So the Force vision is not pure. It's sort of like his own fears. And the nightmares are basically reflecting what he wants to believe, that somehow Obi-Wan has already betrayed him with Padme sexually or emotionally, that they're a couple together. And if you look at sort of the cut scenes and cut dialogue that show up later in comic books and in other places, the dialogue does point out that Anakin makes this accusation very directly, that Padme somehow planned to, when she brought Obi-Wan to Mustafar, that they basically had a sexual affair together, that they planned to kill him, and then they were going to take over. And again, we know from the objective sense, we know that he's lying, he's not correct, but from his own paranoid point of view, he thinks this is true. But the point here is that there's a doubling structure like there was with Mace and Palpatine, right? Sort of like what happens with him and Dooku, with Anakin and Dooku, is going to mirror what's going to happen with him and Mace, and he has to make two key decisions, right? Whether to kill somebody or not kill somebody. And in the first one, he gives in, and then with Mace, he doesn't kill Mace, but he does hurt him, and then he lets Sidious attack him. And in the case with, again, at the end with Mustafar, he has a choice. Again, he has the Force vision. He can give in to the nightmare, and he does. He becomes paranoid. But again, earlier, Anakin and Obi-Wan are very friendly when they see each other. There's no hostility. There's no suspicion. So again, he's trying to sort of point out this ironic counterpoint in terms of Anakin's mind. I'm talking about Lucas, that the way we're framing Anakin is he goes from, he thinks of Obi-Wan as his father/brother, and later he thinks that this brother/father is having kind of this incestuous sex with his lover/wife, right? And this is, again, going back to the Jedi Code, that you don't want long-term attachments because these kind of jealousies can sort of start to erupt even with somebody you trust. So that's the thematic point, but it kind of ruins the ring structure because, again, when we look at Star Wars 1977, there's no such thing. I mean, there is sexual jealousy between Han, Luke, and Leia, but it's very subdued, right? Luke never tries to physically hurt Han just to have Leia to himself. So there's sort of like a similar structure, a triadic structure, but there's not the same mirror structure because, again, Anakin is not Luke and Luke is not Anakin. So there's a huge, big difference between what's going on in the events. I think finally, just to prove some additional evidence, in the original version of Revenge of the Sith, apparently the bloody kind of massacre that Anakin does against the Separatists is much more graphic. It's also much more elongated. Because the thing we see in the film is that we only see some of the Separatists in a conference room, and we don't see them being actually executed, but apparently Lucas did film it, where he goes very graphically killing off all the Separatists. And if you go through the comic book, we get more details on what happened. And again, this contradicts Star Wars 1977, where Luke never engages in such brutality against the stormtroopers. He just basically defends himself. He shoots a couple people, and again, he does use his powers, but he doesn't really, it's sort of proportionate to what's going on. Obviously, we can debate whether killing the Death Star and all those civilians technically within the Death Star counts, but again, we're not given any indication that Luke himself is sort of like he likes killing people, whereas Anakin at least partly does enjoy it, and he actually mocks Obi-Wan in the original dialogue that the dark side is way more powerful than the light side, and again, Lucas cut that out. So again, to recap, I do think the ring theory does give us a lot of great insights into the prequels, and it obviously is correct in certain points, but I think just having the one theory argument is not going to work. We have to look more deeply and closely at what's going on in the films, and I think it's a more double ring theory, where basically the scenes are rhyming with one another, but within the same film, and he's also adding this whole theme of doppelgangers and doubles, and I don't think that's original to him. I think, again, he's taking this a lot from Kubrick, because if you look at 2001, there's a lot of symbols of duality and fate and destiny, and people meeting one another again and again. And I'm not going to go through 2001, because I think that's solved through a very kind of clever trick of we're seeing clones, essentially, or alternate realities, and he sort of solves the problem that way. He's not going as far as that in Revenge of the Sith. As far as I understand it, it's one story. It is semi-linear, so we're not seeing literal clones, but we're seeing only one version of each character. But I do think he's doing something similar in terms of duality, doppelgangers, and doubling structures and things like that, and having a rhyme structure within the films. So I think it's both. There's a lot of rhymes going on between the films, but also rhymes within the films. So I think the best solution it would be there's a kind of double ring structure, not just one ring structure, and there's a kind of Kubrick influence. So it's basically a DRK theme that's running throughout Revenge of the Sith, and I think we get to look at the extra textual evidence of the cut scenes and cut dialogue, and the way he was going to do scenes originally to prove that. Alright, that does it for now with the ring theory. There's obviously a lot more to go into. I gave only a very simplified version of the argument. I would recommend going through the article yourself. It's very good. It's very he cites a lot of sources. So I think he makes a persuasive case, but ultimately he's wrong. Okay, this has been Star Wars Analyzed on the ring theory regarding the prequels, specifically Revenge of the Sith. Star Wars Analyzed, if you like the content, please hit the like button and or subscribe below. I will take any criticism or comments below. Thank you very much, and be safe.